12 R&B groups that broke up right after their biggest hit. What if the moment that made you famous was the exact moment everything started to fall apart? These weren't unknown groups or one-hit wonders fading quietly. These were R&B legends who reached the top of the charts, then broke apart almost immediately while the world was still singing their biggest song. Behind the slow jams and dance floor classics were stories of tragedy, pressure, betrayal, and choices that changed lives forever. If you grew up with this music, these stories will hit different now. This is Legends of Black Excellence, where we don't just play the hits, we reveal the truth behind them. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe. Heatwave. In 1977, Heatwave appeared to be unstoppable. Boogie Nights exploded onto the charts, peaking at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, and becoming one of the defining crossover records of the disco-funk era. The group itself felt symbolic of unity and possibility. American, British, Swiss, and Czech musicians coming together in London, proving that black music could travel effortlessly across borders. On the surface, this should have been the beginning of a long, lucrative run. Behind the scenes, however, Heatwave was already unraveling in ways no hit record could protect. Before the band even entered the studio to record their debut album, Too Hot to Handle, tragedy struck. Guitarist Jesse Witten was stabbed to death in Chicago in 1976, a loss that forced the group to replace a founding member before the world ever heard their sound. The sessions went on anyway, an early lesson in how the music industry rarely pauses for grief. Just 1 year later, bassist Mario Mantes was stabbed by his girlfriend after a party, an incident that left him clinically dead for several minutes. He survived, but emerged blind, partially paralyzed, unable to speak, and with no memory of the event. Few groups in R&B history have endured such devastation so early, let alone while climbing the charts. At that point, would you have kept going? Or would the success have felt meaningless? In 1979, another blow landed. Lead singer Johnny Wilder. The emotional core of Heatwave's sound was involved in a car accident that left him paralyzed from the neck down. Most bands would have quietly dissolved. Instead, Heatwave continued recording with Wilder producing vocals from a wheelchair and later from a hospital bed. Albums like Central Heating and Candles still generated hits, but the original chemistry was gone. Touring required replacement singers, and the lineup slowly fractured across countries, contracts, and medical realities. By the mid to late 1980s, Heatwave was no longer a functioning unit in the traditional sense. The name lived on through scattered performances and legal entanglements, but the shared dream that produced Boogie Nights had effectively ended at its peak. Heatwave didn't break up because audiences stopped listening, they broke apart because life intervened with brutal force. Their story stands as one of the clearest examples in R&B history that commercial triumph does not equal stability, and sometimes the moment a group reaches the top is the exact moment everything underneath collapses. Con Funk Shun. Con Funk Shun's story is not about sudden tragedy or overnight collapse. It is about what happens when success stretches loyalty to its breaking point. Formed by childhood friends from Vallejo, California, the group represented something rare in R&B, a self-contained band that grew up together, rehearsed together, and believed collective identity would always come before individual ambition. When their 1977 hit, Fun climbed to number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart, Con Funk Shun became a staple of Black America's social soundtrack, echoing through cookouts, weddings, roller rinks, and late-night radio across the country. From 1978 through the mid-1980s, their output was relentless. 11 albums in roughly 10 years, multiple gold-certified projects, and a touring schedule that rarely slowed. Songs like Love's Train, Chase Me, and Straight from the Heart didn't just chart, they embedded themselves into everyday life. Unlike many groups of the era, Con Funk Shun didn't rely on outside writers or producers. The music came from inside the brotherhood. That creative independence, however, would eventually fuel the conflict that tore them apart. As the group's profile grew, So did disagreements over money publishing and artistic direction. Vocalists Michael Cooper and Felton Pilot increasingly clashed with drummer Louis McCall over leadership and financial transparency. These weren't abstract disputes handled quietly by managers, they were personal, emotional, and deeply tied to years of shared history. By 1986, tensions exploded into a physical confrontation crossing a line that could not be undone. Cooper and Pilot walked away immediately, taking with them the voices most audiences associated with the group. The remaining members attempted to continue under the same name, recruiting replacement singers and releasing new material. But Con Funk Shun, without its signature vocal blend, felt unfamiliar, and listeners noticed. By 1987, the momentum that had carried them for a decade was gone. What made their breakup especially painful was the contrast, a group that once symbolized unity and longevity, collapsing right after proving how successful that unity could be. Unlike bands undone by addiction or outside exploitation, Con Funk Shun fractured from internal strain. Their biggest hits didn't expose weakness in the music, they exposed fault lines in relationships that fame intensified rather than healed. The irony remains, striking a band whose legacy is built on songs about love, connection, and emotional honesty ultimately discovered that success tests bonds more ruthlessly than failure ever does. Con Funk Shun didn't fall apart after fading from relevance. They broke at the height of their influence, leaving behind timeless records and a cautionary lesson about what success demands from those who share it. Switch R&B. Switch emerged in the late 1970s with a sound that felt effortless and intimate, blending falsetto tenderness with street-level honesty. Their breakthrough ballad There'll Never Be peaked at number 6 on the Billboard R&B chart in 1978 and crossed over to the pop audience, announcing Switch as Motown's next sophisticated vocal group. The record's restraint, soft harmonies, aching vulnerability, and a lead voice that sounded almost weightless made it timeless. Yet even as the single climbed, the foundation of the group was already cracking under pressures the audience couldn't hear. At the center was lead singer Bobby DeBarge, whose falsetto became the group's signature and emotional anchor. Switch followed their debut with momentum, 4 gold-certified albums by 1980, steady radio rotation, and national touring. From the outside, they appeared to be winning the long game. Inside the studio and on the road, however, addiction was taking control. Bobby's heroin dependence increasingly disrupted recording schedules, rehearsals, and performances, placing unbearable strain on the rest of the lineup. What began as concern soon became exhaustion. As the tension grew, members made difficult choices. Vocalist Philip Ingram left first, unable to continue watching a friend self-destruct while the machine kept moving. His exit marked a turning point, signaling that success alone could not hold the group together. Shortly afterward, Bobby and his brother Tommy DeBarge stepped away, not to recover but to focus on developing their younger siblings. That decision would give birth to the DeBarge Family Project, redirecting talent and attention away from Switch almost overnight. If the voice that defines a group is falling apart, do you protect the brand or the person? By 1981, Switch attempted to continue with replacement members, releasing an album in 1984 that failed to connect with audiences. Without the emotional pull of Bobby's lead, the music felt technically competent but spiritually hollow. Fans sensed the absence immediately. The group name remained, but the chemistry that made There'll Never Be resonate was gone. Switch didn't fade gradually. They stalled at the exact moment they should have been consolidating their place in R&B history. The aftermath adds another layer of tragedy. Bobby DeBarge's struggles followed him long after Switch dissolved. He would later be diagnosed with HIV and die from AIDS-related complications in 1995 at age 39, a loss that reframed the group's story in hindsight. Switch's breakup wasn't driven by creative disagreements or declining popularity. It happened because the cost of maintaining success became higher than the cost of walking away. Their biggest hit didn't save them. It exposed how fragile the balance between art health and survival really was. Shalamar. Shalamar didn't just make hit records. They reshaped how R&B looked, moved, and felt at the turn of the 1980s. When the second time around was released in 1979, it became a global breakthrough, reaching #1 on the Billboard R&B chart and #8 on the Hot 100, while also dominating dance floors in the UK. The group's appeal wasn't limited to vocals. Shalamar introduced a new visual language to black pop music, blending precision choreography, futuristic fashion, and athletic performance at a time when MTV was beginning to redefine stardom. The classic lineup, Jody Watley, Howard Hewitt, and Jeffrey Daniel, represented something rare: singers who were also elite dancers. Jeffrey Daniel famously performed the backslide on British television in 1982, nearly a year before Michael Jackson unveiled the moonwalk on Motown 25. Shalamar wasn't following trends, they were setting them. Albums like Big Fun and 3 for Love went platinum, and the group became one of Solar Records' most visible success stories, touring internationally and appearing constantly on television. Yet behind the polished cracks were forming. Despite strong sales and packed shows, royalty payments did not match the group's commercial impact. Disputes with label head Dick Griffey over accounting and control grew more intense as the group's profile expanded. Success magnified the imbalance between image and reality. By 1983, tensions within the trio reached a breaking point during the filming of a music video. Jody Watley's conflict with Howard Hewitt became so severe that a body double was used for much of the shoot, an unthinkable sign that the group no longer functioned as a unit. Watley chose to leave immediately after filming Wrapped, stepping away from platinum albums and international fame to reclaim autonomy. Jeffrey Daniel exited around the same period, ending the era that had defined Shalamar's cultural influence. Although the group continued with new members, the original chemistry, equal parts sound, style, and movement, was gone. Watley's subsequent solo career validated her decision, producing multiple top 10 hits and a Grammy Award, while Hewitt also found individual success. Shalamar's breakup is often misunderstood because it didn't come from declining popularity. They separated at their creative and commercial peak precisely when the world wanted more. Their story illustrates a recurring truth in R&B history. Visibility does not guarantee fairness, and innovation does not always protect artists from exploitation. Shalamar didn't lose their audience. They lost faith in a system that demanded everything while giving too little back. Atlantic Starr. Atlantic Starr's breakup story is one of the clearest examples of how a group can reach absolute commercial triumph and still fall apart almost immediately afterward. Formed in White Plains, New York, the band spent years refining a polished blend of soul, funk, and pop, slowly building an audience through consistent releases and touring. That long climb appeared to pay off in 1987, when Always became their defining moment. The ballad reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, #1 R&B, and #1 Adult Contemporary. A rare triple chart achievement that turned Atlantic Starr into a household name overnight. At the center of that success was lead vocalist Barbara Weathers, whose restrained emotional delivery helped make Always a wedding standard and one of the most recognizable slow jams of the decade. The Lewis brothers, David Wayne and Jonathan, had finally achieved the crossover breakthrough they had been chasing since the late 1970s. Even more symbolically, Barbara Weathers and Wayne Lewis were engaged, giving the impression that the band's personal and professional futures were perfectly aligned. To the public, Atlantic Starr looked unbreakable. Behind the scenes, the reality was far more fragile. The sudden financial windfall from Always intensified unresolved questions about royalties, songwriting credit, and leadership. What had once been manageable disagreements became emotionally charged conflicts, especially between Wayne Lewis and Weathers. The pressure of success didn't create new problems. It exposed old ones that had never been fully addressed. As arguments escalated, the line between romantic partnership and business partnership blurred beyond repair. When love and money collide at the exact moment you've made it, which one survives? By 1988, barely a year after their biggest hit peaked, Barbara Weathers walked away from Atlantic Starr entirely. Her departure ended both the engagement and the classic lineup that fans associated with the group's greatest success. Atlantic Starr continued recording with new female vocalists and released several more albums, but none matched the cultural or commercial impact of Always. The chemistry that defined their breakthrough could not be replicated through replacements or production tweaks. The long-term consequences were just as telling. In 1997, founding member David Lewis left the music industry altogether to pursue Christian ministry, signaling a deeper reckoning with fame and purpose. Atlantic Starr didn't implode in a dramatic scandal or public feud. They unraveled quietly right after achieving what most groups spend a lifetime chasing. Their story underscores a recurring theme in R&B history: the moment a band reaches its highest peak is often when unresolved tensions become impossible to ignore. Atlantic Starr didn't break up because audiences stopped listening. They broke because success forced them to confront questions they had postponed for years. And by the time those questions surfaced the hit that brought them, everything had already taken too much away. DeBarge's rise looked like a fairy tale built on blood harmony and youthful promise. Formed by siblings from Grand Rapids, Michigan, the group carried the unmistakable falsetto of El DeBarge into the mainstream at a moment when Motown was searching for its next generational act. That moment arrived in 1985 with Rhythm of the Night, a global smash that reached top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 topped charts in multiple countries and earned a gold-certified album. The song's brightness, synth-driven, joyful, and cinematic, made DeBarge feel untouchable, as if success had finally aligned perfectly with family unity. Behind the hit, however, the group was already fractured. While the single climbed radio playlists and MTV rotation, most of the siblings, Bunny, Randy, Mark, and James, were struggling with severe cocaine and heroin addiction. The dysfunction was so advanced that several members were unable to participate fully in recording sessions. As a result, El DeBarge recorded much of the Rhythm of the Night album almost alone, a reality Motown executives quietly ignored because the commercial results were too strong to disrupt. The group existed on paper and on stage, but not in the studio the way audiences imagined. As the pressure mounted, El DeBarge issued an ultimatum: the group could continue only if his siblings committed to sobriety. That moment marked the true breaking point. The addictions did not stop, and by 1986, DeBarge effectively dissolved as a functioning group. What makes their story particularly painful is timing. The breakup didn't come after declining sales or fading relevance. It happened immediately after the record that was supposed to secure their future. El attempted to move forward as a solo artist, achieving moderate success before falling into addiction himself by the late 1980s. Meanwhile, the rest of the family faced years of legal trouble, incarceration, and health crises that would later become public knowledge. In hindsight, Rhythm of the Night sounds almost haunting, a song about joy and escape, released at the exact moment the group lost control of both. DeBarge's collapse wasn't driven by creative disagreements or industry betrayal alone. It was the result of unaddressed trauma, generational cycles, and a system that rewarded performance while overlooking survival. Their biggest hit didn't save them. It masked the damage long enough for the spotlight to move on. Today, DeBarge stands as one of the clearest examples in R&B history that family harmony on record does not guarantee harmony in real life, especially when success arrives faster than healing ever could. Bloodstone R&B. Bloodstone's story stands apart from most R&B breakups because it was never about ego contracts or sudden fame. It was about time loss and the quiet erosion that can begin even at the moment of greatest achievement. Formed in Kansas City, the group was one of the earliest black bands to fuse soul, funk, rock, and gospel into a single sound, challenging industry expectations long before crossover success was fashionable. Their defining moment arrived in 1973 with Natural High, a soaring ballad that reached number 10 on the Billboard R&B chart and number 4 on the Hot 100, eventually earning gold certification. For a black rock-influenced band in the early 1970s, that achievement was historic. The success of Natural High should have marked the beginning of a long, stable run. Instead, it coincided with the first irreversible loss. In July 1973, the same year the song peaked, percussionist Roger Durham died at just 27 years old from kidney failure and liver complications. Unlike many groups who stop immediately after such a blow, Bloodstone chose to continue. They kept recording, touring, and honoring their commitment to the music, even as grief became part of their daily reality. How do you move forward when the sound you built together now carries the memory of someone who's gone? Throughout the late 1970s, Bloodstone released additional albums and maintained a loyal following, sharing stages with legends like Marvin Gaye and Curtis Mayfield. But the original lineup was never whole again. Over the decades, more losses followed. Melvin Webb in 1982, Willis Draffin in 2002, Charles Love in 2014, Charles McCormick in 2022, and finally, Harry Williams, the group's lead vocalist who passed away in 2024 at age 80. Each death removed another piece of the sound, another shared memory, another living witness to how it all began. What makes Bloodstone's story especially haunting is that they never officially disbanded. There was no press release, no dramatic final concert, no public declaration of the end. Instead, the group slowly faded through funerals rather than headlines. The name remained, the recordings endured, but the collective heart that created Natural High was gradually reduced to echoes. Bloodstone didn't break up right after their biggest hit in the traditional sense. They began to disappear right after it. Their peak marked the start of a long subtraction where success and loss coexisted in the same year. In the history of R&B, few stories illustrate more clearly that not all endings are loud. Some are measured in decades, carried quietly by the last voices, who remember how the harmony once felt when everyone was still alive to sing it together. Lakeside R&B. Lakeside's rise represents one of the purest examples of black funk achieving mainstream dominance without sacrificing identity. Formed in Dayton, Ohio, the group spent more than a decade sharpening their sound before national success arrived. That breakthrough came in 1980 with Fantastic Voyage, a joyful escapist anthem that reached #1 on the Billboard R&B chart and became one of the most enduring party records in American music. Unlike many groups of their era, Lakeside was fully self-contained, writing, arranging, and producing their own material, giving them rare creative control in an industry that often stripped artists of authorship. At the moment Fantastic Voyage peaked, Lakeside appeared perfectly positioned for longevity. The group had 9 original members, a unified vision, and a catalog that balanced dance floor energy with musicianship rooted in years of live performance. Songs like Raid, It's All the Way Live, and Something About That Woman kept them relevant through the early 1980s, while their stage shows reinforced a sense of collective identity. To audiences, Lakeside felt unbreakable, more like a musical family than a business arrangement. But success in the music industry is rarely static. By the mid-1980s, the landscape began to shift dramatically. Funk bands that had dominated the previous decade were suddenly competing with the rise of synth-driven R&B solo stars and later New Jack Swing. Record executives increasingly pushed for reinvention, often without clear direction. For a group built on ensemble chemistry, adapting to trends designed for individual frontmen created strain. Opportunities became uneven, and members began exploring outside projects, session work, and solo paths not out of conflict, but out of survival. Lakeside never experienced a dramatic breakup or public fallout. Instead, the original lineup slowly dissolved as touring demands, shifting priorities, and changing tastes pulled the group in different directions. By the late 1980s, Fantastic Voyage remained their last major chart topper, even as the song itself grew larger than the band, reappearing in films, commercials, and sampling culture for decades to come. The irony is that their biggest hit outlived the structure that created it. What makes Lakeside's story resonate is its realism. They didn't fail creatively, nor were they undone by scandal. They simply reached the summit at a time when the ground beneath R&B was already moving. Lakeside didn't break up immediately after Fantastic Voyage, but that song marked the beginning of a slow drift away from the moment they once owned. Their legacy endures not because they disappeared, but because they captured a feeling so perfectly that it never needed to be repeated. LTD R&B. LTD's rise was built on patience musicianship and years of quiet grinding before mainstream recognition finally arrived. Originally formed in Greensboro, North Carolina, the group spent the early 1970s working behind the scenes as backing musicians for acts like Sam and Dave, learning discipline and polish, long before radio ever called their name. That preparation paid off in 1977, when Back in Love Again became a breakthrough moment, reaching #1 on the Billboard R&B chart and #4 on the Hot 100. The song introduced the world to the warm, conversational baritone of Jeffrey Osborne, a voice that instantly separated LTD from their peers. For several years, the formula worked. LTD balanced romantic ballads with up-tempo funk, releasing a steady run of albums that performed well on black radio. Their sound felt mature, confident, and grounded music made by seasoned performers rather than overnight sensations. As a 10-piece, self-contained band, they represented collective strength at a time when labels were increasingly favoring individual stars. But that same structure would soon become a limitation rather than an advantage. By the late 1970s, it was clear that Jeffrey Osborne's voice had become the group's primary identifier. Industry attention interviews and audience focus centered more and more on him, subtly shifting the balance within the band. While the music remained collaborative, perception did not. For Osborne, being one voice among 10 began to feel restrictive, especially as he recognized his potential to connect directly with listeners on a larger scale. The success of albums like Shine On made the question unavoidable. When the world starts hearing only one voice, is it selfish to step forward or necessary to survive? In 1980, shortly after the release of Shine On, Jeffrey Osborne made the decision to leave LTD to pursue a solo career. His brother Billy Osborne departed alongside him, removing not just the lead vocal presence, but a core emotional component of the group. LTD attempted to continue recruiting new singers and releasing additional albums through the early 1980s. While the musicianship remained strong, the results were modest. Without the voice audiences had come to associate with their biggest hit, the group struggled to maintain the same cultural impact. Osborne's solo success quickly confirmed what fans already suspected. Songs like On the Wings of Love and Stay With Me Tonight turned him into a star in his own right, while LTD gradually faded from the charts. Their breakup wasn't fueled by bitterness, addiction, or scandal. It came from growth moving faster than the container that once nurtured it. LTD didn't collapse after failure, they fractured after success clarified individual paths. Back in Love Again didn't end the group immediately, but it marked the moment when unity and ambition quietly diverged. In R&B history, LTD stands as a reminder that sometimes the very thing that makes a group special can also make staying together impossible. Rolls-Royce R&B. Rolls-Royce's rise is one of the most dramatic examples of how a group can reach the absolute top of popular music and begin falling apart almost immediately afterward. The Los Angeles-based band had already spent years developing as a tight, self-contained funk unit under various names, before producer Norman Whitfield reshaped their direction in the mid-1970s. That gamble paid off spectacularly in 1976, when Car Wash became a cultural phenomenon. The single reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, earned a Grammy Award, and anchored a soundtrack that went multi-platinum, turning Rolls-Royce into instant stars. At the center of that success was Gwen Dickey, whose smooth yet sensual lead vocal gave the group a recognizable emotional signature. Almost overnight, her voice became inseparable from Rolls-Royce's identity. The band followed Car Wash with a remarkable run of R&B hits, including I Wanna Get Next to You, I'm Going Down, and Wishing on a Star, all of which reached the top 10 on the R&B charts. From the outside, Rolls-Royce looked like a perfectly balanced machine, talented musicians, a charismatic lead singer, and a producer who knew how to shape radio-ready records. Behind the scenes, however, the structure was deeply imbalanced. Whitfield was known for punishing studio schedules, sometimes keeping the group recording for extended sessions that strained marriage's health and morale. At the same time, media attention increasingly focused on Gwen Dickey as the face and voice of the band, while the remaining members felt overshadowed and undercredited. What had once been collective pride gradually turned into resentment. The success that lifted them also magnified divisions that had no space to heal. By 1980, after 4 intense years of hit-making and non-stop pressure, Gwen Dickey made the decision to leave Rolls-Royce entirely. Her exit was decisive and final. Without her voice, the group continued with replacement singers, but the shift was immediate and noticeable. While later releases maintained solid musicianship, none recaptured the emotional impact or commercial power of their peak years. Audiences didn't just miss a singer, they missed the sound that defined an era. Rolls-Royce didn't break up because the hits stopped. They broke because the cost of sustaining those hits became unsustainable. Car Wash remains a timeless classic, but it also marks the moment when fame accelerated internal fractures beyond repair. Their story illustrates a hard truth in R&B history. Sometimes the biggest success doesn't unify a group. It clarifies who can endure the spotlight and who decides that walking away is the only way to survive it. Slave R&B. Slave's ascent was fast, forceful, and rooted in raw Ohio funk. Formed in Dayton, the group emerged from the same regional ecosystem that produced some of the tightest rhythm sections of the 1970s. Their breakout arrived in 1977 with Slide, a lean bass-driven anthem that reached #1 on the Billboard R&B chart, and announced Slave as a serious contender alongside the era's funk heavyweights. The record's hypnotic groove, anchored by Mark Adams's slithering bass line, felt unapologetically physical, built for dance floors, rather than pop polish. At first, Slave functioned as a true ensemble horns percussion and a relentless pocket that prized feel over flash. The early lineup embodied a communal approach to funk, where repetition and discipline created power. Momentum carried them into steady touring and additional charting records, but the band's identity began to evolve dramatically in 1978 when Steve Arrington joined as drummer. Arrington wasn't just a timekeeper. He was a melodic thinker with deep musical training, having studied percussion and fusion techniques that stretched beyond traditional funk structures. That shift reshaped Slave's sound. Arrington's voice soon became the group's defining element, leading hits like Just a Touch of Love, Watching You, and Snapshot. These songs pushed Slave into a more melodic, radio-friendly space while maintaining rhythmic authority. Commercially, it worked. Creatively, it created imbalance. As Arrington's profile rose, the gap between contribution and control became harder to ignore. He was delivering the signature moments, yet ownership and decision-making remained locked into an arrangement that treated him as an employee rather than a partner. When your ideas are driving the success, but you don't control the direction, how long can you keep giving without resentment? By 1982, after the release of Showtime, Arrington reached a breaking point. He wanted autonomy over songwriting, production, and the business that surrounded his creativity. Leaving Slave meant risking everything: audience familiarity, label backing, and the safety of a known brand. But staying meant limiting growth. Arrington walked away to form Steve Arrington's Hall of Fame, taking with him the melodic sensibility that had defined Slave's most successful era. Slave continued recording into the mid-1990s with rotating members, but the results told a clear story. Without Arrington's voice and vision, the band struggled to recapture its earlier impact. The grooves remained competent, yet the spark audiences recognized was gone. Unlike groups undone by scandal or addiction, Slave fractured over authorship and control, the quiet economics of creativity. Their story fits the title precisely. Slave didn't break up after fading from relevance. They split right after their sound peaked, when Slide and its successors had finally pushed them to the front of the conversation. In R&B history, Slave stands as a reminder that success can sharpen questions artists postpone for years, and when those questions finally demand answers, unity often can't survive them. Tavares. Tavares' story is a rare case where a group didn't implode in scandal or sudden conflict, yet still began dissolving almost immediately after reaching its highest peak. Formed by 5 Cape Verdean American brothers from Providence and New Bedford, Ralph, Pooch, Chubby Butch, and Tiny, the group had been singing together since 1959, first as Chubby and the Turnpikes. By the time they rebranded as Tavares in the early 1970s, their harmony was not a product of studio chemistry, but of shared childhood church and family discipline. Their breakthrough arrived in 1976 with Heaven Must Be Missing an Angel, which reached number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a defining disco-era crossover hit. The song's lush orchestration and seamless vocal blend introduced Tavares to a global audience, positioning them as both R&B craftsmen and pop contenders. Momentum continued with Don't Take Away the Music, and soon after a career-defining opportunity emerged, the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. Their contribution, More Than a Woman, won a Grammy Award and helped power an album that sold over 11 million copies worldwide. For a brief moment, Tavares were everywhere: Soul Train American Bandstand international tours and non-stop radio play. Yet the exposure came with a cost. The massive success of Saturday Night Fever reshaped public perception, rebranding Tavares primarily as a disco act, despite their roots in traditional R&B and soul. When the disco backlash hit in the early 1980s, radio formats shifted abruptly. The same industry that elevated them moved on just as quickly, leaving fewer outlets for their sound. Unlike many groups on this list, Tavares didn't announce a breakup after their biggest hit. They continued recording through the 1980s, but chart success steadily declined and the original unity began to thin. Time, health, and exhaustion replaced creative conflict as the forces pulling them apart. The group's later history became defined less by separation than by loss. Pooch suffered a stroke in 2014. Ralph passed away in 2021, just days before his 80th birthday. Pooch later died in 2024, and Chubby followed shortly after at 81, leaving only Butch and Tiny from the original 5. Tavares never truly broke up. They faded through the slow arithmetic of mortality beginning right after their greatest triumph. Their story fits the title in a quieter, more haunting way. The peak didn't end the group immediately, but it marked the moment their identity shifted beyond their control. In R&B history, Tavares stand as proof that sometimes the saddest endings aren't dramatic splits, but long goodbyes that begin the instant the applause is loudest. The stories of these 12 R&B groups remind us that the biggest hit is not always a blessing, it can be a breaking point. Fame arrived fast, money followed, but pressure, tragedy, addiction, and industry control often came quicker than protection or healing. These artists gave the world timeless music, yet many paid for success with their unity, their health, or their families. At Legends of Black Excellence, we honor not only the chart positions and gold records, but the human cost behind the sound. So here's the real question. Did these groups fall apart because success destroyed them, or because the music industry was never designed to truly protect Black excellence once the hit was secured?